Rev up your engines!
Well, don't say I didn't say so, but I did. Now, they're having a heat wave in Texas. They're cranking up the AC. All the congested transmission lines, the wires you see flying through the air, right, cause all this renewable wind power to go to waste because it can't get from the windmills to the houses. There's not enough quality wire that can hold it, right? So people don't understand. Now, Texas actually leads the nation in renewable power. It's a big place. They got a lot of windmills and stuff. Hundreds of them just twirling away, right? But they don't have a storage system for them. So they had to shut them down. Even though all these people, we need electricity for our AC in Houston. Well, you can't get it because the wires are too crappy, right? And this is just running your AC. This isn't recharging your millions of electric cars that the government says we're all going to go out and happily smile and buy, right? Think about it, people. If you're sweating in Houston right now, add a few million electric cars, you'll really be sweating, baby. And then they say, well, you can use your electric cars to power your house. Yeah, but then you got to recharge the car. When are you going to recharge it? If it's hot all the time, you're going to use the battery in your car, then you won't be able to drive anywhere. Then when you try to charge it, it won't charge because it needs a tremendous amount of amperage. And you get a brownout, you won't have enough amperage to charge it back up. So think about that. You might be able to use it for a short period of time. But when it's out, you got to recharge it, and so does everybody else. Well, I love these ridiculous news stories. This one, Tesla tells the U.S. EPA that they could go all electric by 2030, but they would settle for 69% of new car sales being all electric. Okay, this is an electric car company that's selling electric cars. What a load of horse manure stories, right? These are the guys that make it and the guys that regulate things, the EPA, right? How about us, the regular citizens, yeah? Yeah, we're going to be driving around these electric cars that cost a fortune. There's no infrastructure. Totally inconvenient for getting anywhere. They'll cost a fortune. The batteries will break on. They'll start on fire. All kinds of problems, right? Yet, the two people in the ivory tower, oh, this is great. Oh, yes, we're both phenomenal. Aren't we great people? This reminds me of what happened in Buffalo, New York. State of New York gave old Elon Musk like $1.2 billion to build a factory in Buffalo to make solar panels. That was going to make 2,000 houses every day worth the solar panels. They're making like 120 or something. Nobody's buying the things. You can't force people to buy this crap, right? Now, if these politicians think they can, they got another thing coming because the next election, guess who's going to get thrown out on their ear? And someone else more sympathetic to people that have transportation problems they have to solve that will only be made worse if they have to switch to electricity. Who's going to pay for all that money? There's no electricity anyways. There's no lines to send the stuff. In Texas, they just had a thing. They got brownouts because there's too much heat. It's in the hundreds to run the AC, right? And they're finding that they can't even use their wind power because the lines from the wind power to the houses aren't good enough, so they had to shut the wind power down because they don't have any way of storing it. They just send it out, and they can't send it all out to these power lines because the power lines are already taxed to the max because they're old piles of crap. Anybody that thinks this stuff is coming, oh yeah, it's 7 years, we're all going to be buying electric cars, yeah? Ha! Let's see what happens 6.5 years from now. That's all I got to say. Well, Richard 9923's got a story to tell about a sleazy Acura dealer, and here we go. I purchased an MDX 2014. It had 5 of 6 recalls. I didn't have to do the last recall because it didn't have a towing package, but I did all the required Honda Acura maintenance per the written owner's manual. Now it has 51,000 miles, and it's shaking, and people say, hey, it's probably the torque converter. I've had an issue with my 6-speed transmission. It seems that the early vehicle manufacturer like mine have faulty torque converters. You can find it online, right? I went to their dealership and they refused, said it's normal. I contacted Acura and completed via their route of complaining. Acura contacted the dealership. Dealership said the car was neglected and not maintained. The claim was based on all the recommendations they suggested to keep the $60,000 car in condition. All recommendations were not part of Acura's schedules, nor indicated via the system that the car would show codes for, and it didn't need maintenance because they were all done according to the book. Instead, Acura gave me a $400 debit card. The transmission still has the problem, and Acura did nothing. An interesting side to this is The dealership has gone through 3 dealership names. Walpole Acura, Prime Acura Walpole, or Ira Acura. I cannot do much except recommend other dealerships to go to. Well, yeah, usually they're not that bad, you know. They've gone through 3 changes. Now, I know for a fact, some of these companies, they actually care. The Japanese often care, and I've seen them shut dealerships down and force somebody else to run the dealership because they had so many complaints. They don't want a bad image on themselves. And I saw it in Houston, Texas with Saab. There were 3 Saab dealerships, and the Saab company shut them all down. Then it opened up one dealership that it ran itself. Of course, then the company went bankrupt 3 years later and didn't exist at all. That's another story. It just goes to show that, yeah, this happens to the dealerships all the time. They don't care. Oh, Acura was so nice, they gave you a little $400 debit card. You can, $400 for your transmission that to fix it's going to cost many, many, many thousands of dollars, right? That's what I tell you. Dealerships, hey, I know their warranties in quotation mark, not worth the paper they're printed on. Steve-O19816 says, my 2010 Corolla makes a squealing noise. It only happens in winter when I start the car, put it in reverse, and I get a grinding noise coming somewhere around the tires. When I drive 20 yards, it goes away. What you want to do is pull your wheels off, look at the brake pads. If your brake pads have worn down to the metal, they'll make that noise in the beginning as it grounds, right? Let's say you pull them off and the brake pads are really thick. Well, then that's just rust. This is the problem with braking systems. Most cars' brakes, the rotors, are made out of steel, cast iron or steel, right? Guess what happens? It's bare. So when you park overnight, the dew gets on it, it gets rust on it. And then when you take off, forwards or backwards, your brakes have to rub the rust off and it goes back to normal. So if your brakes are still thick and there's plenty of pad, the problem is your rotors are just rusting, and they all do that to some extent. You could put new rotors on, but after a very short period of time, they would start to rust too, and you'll be back to square one. If the noise really drives you nuts, but the pads are okay, what you could do, and this should generally fix it, it's a Japanese company called Akebono, A-K-E-B-O-N-O. They make brake pads for those cars. If you buy the Akebono pads, they're made out of this special ceramic stuff, and it often doesn't make noise like that. You could just replace the pads with Akebono, and the noise should go away. But pull them off. You never know. They might be thin and down to the metal. You want to change them right away. But if they are thick, it's just normal rust and dew from the morning. Rust builds up on bare steel. You hit the brakes, it starts to wipe them off as it wipes the rust off. And when the rust is wiped off, the noise goes away. Oh, Too Cool says, is brake fluid change necessary? Toyota dealer says I need a brake fluid change in my 2015 RAV4 with 85,000 miles. I've never heard of this. Is this real? Well, yeah, it's real because brake fluid is what's called hygroscopic. That means it absorbs water vapor. So over time, water vapor is absorbed into your brake fluid, and the water will corrode the inside of the brake system somewhat, right? And yours is old enough, what? It's 9 years old with 85,000 miles. You can do it yourself. Watch my video. Get a turkey baster, suck all the stuff out of the master cylinder, put new fluid in, and then bleed all 4 wheels. It's not that hard to do. You can easily do it. If they're going to charge you a fortune, do it yourself. I mean, if they're charging $100-something bucks, what the heck? Let them do it. But knowing them, they want a lot more money than that. You can easily do it yourself. All you got to do is buy a bottle of brake fluid and do it yourself. I got videos. How to bleed your car's brakes, Scotty. Type that on YouTube and you'll see it's not that hard to do yourself. But I would do it because over time, water just kind of build up inside and you'll get all the crud out when you bleed it out. Fountain Pen says, I have a new AC compressor, but it won't pull in refrigerant. I got 2007 Pontiac. I installed a new condenser and AC compressor. I used the flush kit to flush the hoses and also the evaporator expansion valve. I installed the parts. I put vacuum for 2 hours. Then the pressure on the low side goes to 80 psi, but the high side stays in vacuum. You either have a restriction in the system or they sold you a crapper compressor. Your low side's 80 psi. It'll do that just by opening the can. It'll go up to about 80 and stop. But your high side's staying in vacuum. That means the high side you evacuated out and nothing is going into the high side. You said you flushed it out. But it could be as simple as your expansion valve is stuck and you need a new expansion valve. You said it's hard to get to, well, you're probably going to have to replace it. I would never, ever, ever flush out a GM system and not replace the orifice tube, because the orifice tube, when you flush it, the crud will get stuck. It's got a little filter inside and it would stuck. It could be as simple as all you need to do is change the orifice tube. But I would change it. I would have changed it. I would have never done what you did without changing it, because if you don't, all that filter, when you flush it, the crud will get flushed into that mesh and it'll just stay there. So hopefully that's the only only thing. If it's not that, then you probably got a bad compressor, and it's just no good that it won't accept it because it was made poorly. I see it all the time these days, especially if you bought a rebuilt one. The rebuilt ones are absolute piles of garbage. I was reading an article the other day, a mechanic in Florida who does AC specialty work. He says 33% of the rebuilt compressors do not work correctly. That's 1 out of 3. I would not buy a rebuilt compressor. Only new ones. That's all I ever use when I replace them. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.